Okay, so let's start out. Now, as you guys know, I've been out of town for a while. I just got back late last night, as a matter of fact. That's a tricky deal, talking about mother-daughter relationships. Or yeah, I guess that's what it is. The disconnect you're talking about.
Right.
I'm going to put it up on the screen here. So give me the data. Adult female number 1. The adult's on the left. The child is on the right. Well, certainly there's compatibility issues. I mean, there can be compatibility issues, but and the things that you look at are the sun, the moon, and the ascendant.
And they're both water sign
And
ascendants.
they're both water sign ascendants, and then the sun in Taurus, and 2 suns in Taurus. Both suns are in Taurus. So, about as compatible sign-wise as you can get. Then, you know, I would look at the 10th house on the right-hand chart for the juvenile. For the daughter, you'd look at the 10th house, ruled by Scorpio. It's got the moon right on the cusp. But and the key thing in the child's chart is the Mars conjunction Uranus. That kind of really sticks out, doesn't it?
The child's Mercury is conjunct the mother's sun in Taurus. They're just
yeah,
over
pretty
a
close.
degree apart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the child, we've got Mercury as the ruler of the mother. Now, so if Mercury is the ruler of the mother, then the mother's a Mercury type person. Is that true? Of course, both those planets are in opposition to the MC. Now, does that have some impact on the mother? I don't know. It might. That's an interesting thing. But Mercury is, you know, not a powerful thing in the mother's chart at all.
I think Mercury was strong in the daughter's chart, though, astrodyne-wise. Yeah, Mercury's the third. Yeah.
So see, it's not powerful in the chart either. There's a dominant Venus here and over here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm confusing my Venus with my
We've got a dominant Mars. So you've got a dominant Mars
For mom,
mother, and you dominant Venus for the daughter. And is there anything else really prominent? Well, Mars and Neptune, and then over here it's Venus and the Sun. So Venus and the Sun, Mars and Neptune. So that's kind of interesting. How has anybody got a suggestion on how a Mars person and a Venus person would get along? If they were male female, they might be attracted to each other.
Uh-huh.
And it can be, you know, the woman can be the Mars and the man can be the Venus. It works either way.
Right.
But if it's a mother-daughter relationship,
In this case, the Pisces is square to Gemini. By sign, they're square.
oh, let's see.
Her Venus in
Her
in
Venus
Gemini
and Gemini. And
squares
her,
mom's Mars in Pisces.
yeah, that's it. That's an interesting thing to look at. And with Mars in the, and you know, Venus in the 7th house and being dominant in the daughter's chart, Mars in the 1st house being
Right
dominant,
on the ascendant. It's
right
real
on the
close,
ascendant.
yeah. And daughter's Mars is also in Pisces, in 11 Pisces. In fact, their Marses are real conjunct in Pisces, and they're both on angles.
Right. They sure are. They're just right on top of each other. So what does that tell us? Maybe there's
I see competition between mother and daughter.
could be competition, some sort of antagonism. Maybe
Yeah.
it's competition. in the mother's chart, you've got Mars and Jupiter in the first house. So, there's a tendency, so that first house is very important to the mother. To the daughter, the important thing in her life is other people, because her power is all in the seventh house.
But the fourth is pretty strong too, don't you think, with the
Sure.
Uranus-Mars
Oh
conjunction
yeah, that's a big deal, and they have
Yeah,
something to do
oppose the
because it's
moon.
opposing the moon, right? Which is relationship with women and could affect, I certainly could affect a mother-daughter relationship, and just the opposition. It's a question in my mind: to what extent do aspects of the MC impact the mother in a child's chart? If the 10th house is supposed to rule the mother, to what extent is that? Well, I don't know. Maybe, does anybody have a comment on that?
Because of so much Venus in the daughter's chart, and then with the Mars in the mother's first house, I was curious if there tend to be arguments over clothes or the way the daughter dresses or looks, if there tend to be disagreement in that area.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's a possibility. Well, she may not want to, so we may
That's
not
okay.
get any insight into this, but we can take a look. We can talk
Yeah.
about it.
The other
And that's a perfectly good suggestion.
Well, in the beginning of the grade school or early years, there might not be as much doing well in school, but in later years, there could be a big change, and the child really does well. And we won't really know for sure until
And
she gets a little older.
What do you base that on? What do
We
you?
were discussing it with Christopher,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know exactly.
Part of
what
it was
it
Neptune in Aquarius in the third. For the perhaps not doing as well. Excuse me for jumping in,
Oh, no, I
Randy,
forgot.
but yeah, I do remember now that you're talking about that. There was the feeling that there might have been some, learning challenges in younger school, but then a discovery of a real love of learning because of the ninth house moon in Virgo.
Mhm.
As she got into, more advanced education.
Well, that whole third house thing, I mean, that Neptune looks like it's in a grand trine with Venus and Jupiter. So in those airy houses, 3rd, 7th, and 11th. So, there you've got partnership and and friends and school all tied together. And you'd expect that this person would be pretty social.
Yeah.
Certainly, relationships with the outside world would tend to be harmonious.
And the T-square in the mutable signs, the Mars-Uranus conjunction at the IC, opposing the Moon-MC conjunction, and then square to Venus in the 7th. That makes a big T-square, which makes me think that she probably, has confidence that she's social and well liked or likable, and at the same time may, I'm guessing, but may like to present in a quirky, idiosyncratic, cutting edge kind of way.
Yeah, she's very, very social.
And does she present in a real idiosyncratic kind of pushing the envelope sort of manner?
Not necessarily. She's more,
The Virgo moon might tame that.
she allows herself to get distracted too easily.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's Venus, right? Because Venus is pliant and wants to do what's fun and wants to take the path of least resistance, and that's her dominant planet. So I wouldn't be surprised that she's easily distracted. Whereas you, on the other hand, might be pretty focused. And, you know, a lot of it, I've seen interesting relationships between, you know, parent and child where, you know, just the parent's manner of talking or how they address the child, or between two spouses, how one addresses the other, the tone of voice, all these things that really irritates the other person. And you go years and years and never quite figure out what it is, you know. And I would think with, you know, you've got that, the mother has that Mars right on the ascendant in the first house.
Conjunct daughter's Mars.
And conjunct the daughter's Mars.
Yeah.
And that T-square from Venus and Neptune, you know, gets a lot of energy. And maybe, for example, I've had people tell me, not just my wife, that my tone of voice sometimes is authoritative, like I know what I'm talking about. Drives my daughter crazy and my wife. Because, yes.
This is Rachel again. And it's been throughout my whole life that people have told me I talk way too loud.
That's Mars on the ascendant, probably.
Yeah, right.
You know, your moon, Mom, is conjunct your daughter's sun as well. I mean, opposite. Your moon's in 27 Scorpio. Her sun's in 26 Taurus.
And mother's moon is conjunct daughter's ascendant.
That's right.
And, you know, I wanted to ask something, Paul. Looking at the mother's moon, which can represent mother, conjunct the daughter's ascendant, but looking at the mother's chart, the moon rules, well, is a co-ruler of the fifth house of children, which is where Saturn sits. Can that make children a difficult thing for the mother? It's just more difficult, perhaps.
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, the Saturn in the fifth house, you know, I've just been waiting to get around to that or to see if anybody brings it up. I mean, whatever house you've got Saturn in brings increased work and responsibility and economy or loss. The economy being where you have to be frugal, or things are tight, or there's lack of abundance, or loss. So at a minimum, Saturn always brings extra work and responsibility. And so if you've got Saturn in the fifth house, then often, you know, it shows that children can be a burden.
For me, it wasn't the children. There was a third child in the house that wasn't a child.
These family relationships are always real complicated. So, I mean, you know, we're just sort of kind of grasping at straws here, but this is all kind of interesting, though. I mean, it's still interesting. But still, if you've got Saturn there, then it's more work than if you don't. If you got Saturn in the 11th house, then friends are a lot of work, or they can be a burden. Or you might not have very many, and you might not care about having any either. And so whatever house the Saturn is in, my observation is it pretty much expresses exactly how you'd expect. Now, you also have to take into account, very important is the fact that there's the moon on the, you know, with Cancer, you know, for children, the fifth house, the mother there, you know, there's a fertile sign on the cusp of the fifth house. So, you know, you'd say, well, she's probably going to have children, and you might look at the moon to see, you know, it's not just Saturn. The moon's very important in that house. The ruler of the house is very important. In fact, you know, when the Arabs were developing astrology during the Dark Ages, when Europe was totally dead, they put a lot of emphasis on the ruler of the house. In fact, they felt it was even more important sometimes than the planet in the house. But
So say more about her Scorpio moon ruling that relationship.
Well, you know, when the moon's there, I mean, of course, there's always the nurturing process that goes on, but you know, relationships go through a lot of phases, right? So you've got the inconstancy of the moon. So if the moon's best quality is adaptability and being able to, you know, it's easy to mold to the situation, and of course the nurturing thing. But the worst aspect of the moon is inconstancy, where there's just not, you know, things aren't always the same. They're changed. And of course with children that can be a little confusing. Now I'm not saying that's the case here, but those are the ways the moon expresses. So anybody else want to comment on that? The moon and the ruler of the fifth? You know, a lot of the big impact on relationships is communication, how you communicate with each other.
Mm.
And when you go in, you know, if you've ever done any counseling, I mean, it invariably comes around to how, you know, if a couple is doing counseling, how they communicate, how they talk, the words they use. You know, all the little those words like should, you know, all those words that can cause problems. So communication can be a big thing. They both have Mercury in Taurus. Although Mercury is not prominent in either chart, but the fact that they're both in Taurus is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not sure what it means, but...
Well, Paul,
Yes.
was the midheaven prominent with Astrodynes in the child's chart?
Let's look at it.
I think in one of them the midheaven was prominent.
Yes, and one of them, yes, is the child's chart on the right.
That's the Virgo ruled by Mercury.
Yeah.
And would also, my question is, would that Virgo on the midheaven, prominent midheaven, have a tendency to be rather critical of the mother?
I mean, that's a perfectly valid statement. You know, if they're a critical person, I don't know if she's a dominant Venus, so it's hard, you know.
But having one's moon in Virgo can tend to
Oh,
make
yeah.
it critical.
Oh, well, the moon in Virgo, right,
Yeah.
in conjunction midheaven there. So, Alice Marie, that's certainly a valid comment. Why don't we move on, unless somebody's got questions or comments here.
I'd just like to ask Mom what resonated most with her that was said.
Yeah. Rachel, you want to comment on anything that you thought was right on or way off?
Well, the fifth house, that was way off.
Okay, so you're telling us that what we would normally expect from Saturn in the fifth, you're saying there was no extra work or burdens. It wasn't a burdensome thing.
I was doing
The
everything.
children. You were doing everything. That's what I was going to
doing
say.
Everything. The bills, I was taking care of the kids, everything.
Right.
And if it wasn't for my Jupiter in the first house, I think it would have I wouldn't have pulled out of what I was in.
So it was heavy to have that much responsibility.
And no help?
And it didn't feel like it was heavy. It's just that the only thing weighing me down was that third child in the house.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Just the adult that never grew up.
Right. Well, let's see, that's Pluto and Mercury. Well, we all know Pluto's pretty heavy duty.
It has been a lot easier since the child has left the house.
Okay.
Kind of looks to me like you're a natural leader who has, nevertheless, a lot of emotional sensitivity to other people.
That's true. My daughter's going through the same thing that I went through when I was her age.
Meaning,
I I was not distracted, but I was overloaded. I didn't like being in the classroom. I was getting sick a lot. She is different in that sense, but she gets distracted by people talking around. Me, it's no the classroom was quiet, but just being around all those kids, period, I didn't like that. But her, when people talk, that overloads her too much. So they have to take her out of the class, put her in a special education class, and have her learn her reading separate from the kids. I think she has about an hour away from the class.
Yeah, your description of her makes me look to that Neptune in the third that we were talking about, some learning disability, or especially because Pisces in Aquarius can be, you know, a wandering mind, a real sort of imaginal state of fantasy world kind of thing. So that fits to me with distractibility and stuff. I bet she has a wonderful imagination.
It's awesome.
Okay, well, let's try the other pair of charts. Let's put them up there and see what happens. Juvenile male.
Yeah, juvenile male number 1.
This real quick, do the other one.
It's
Teenage female.
Right, number 1.
Teenage female. Well, we've got the teenage female on the left and the juvenile male on
Moon's conjunct
the right.
female number 1.
Well, first of all, what are we going to talk about here? Doing charts of children is much more difficult than doing charts of adults because their life is still forming, and things that you don't see now eventually will happen. You know, as they mature, then how they express their chart. So it can be pretty tricky. That being said, so hey, Walt, give us a hint about something that might be fun to look at, or a question, or about these charts.
Well, my son is very. He's also been diagnosed with ADHD.
ADHD.
Yeah, my wife's a special education teacher. He's very, very social, a very loving son. My daughter was an easy child. She was very quiet. Her moods weren't as traumatic as his. They're both very loving kids. I know that the chart is actually a blueprint of his subconscious mind, and I'm just trying to get a gist of how to interpret it and what to prepare for. And she's just turning, she's a young teenager, so they kind of clash a little bit, but that's to be expected.
Well, one question that comes up, Vicki and I have been looking at our grandson's chart a lot and trying to figure out what's he going to be when he grows up. Well, you can't. There's no way to figure out from a chart what a person is going to be. By the time these kids grow up, there's so many different things that they can do, characteristic that are characteristic of how their chart expresses. But you can get a general idea of what direction they might go in, or what would be helpful to them, to emphasize or to make sure that they get good schooling or training or something in certain areas, either where they have great strength or where they have significant weakness. So, like if we looked at the girl on the left, the Astrology summary, she's primarily a fire person. She's fixed fire, so what is she? Must have a lot of it. Okay, so, and then her dominant planets are Neptune, Moon, Uranus. Neptune, Moon, and Uranus. So you've got, so the moon's right here on the, what was Neptune? Was the dominant? Is that what it said? No. Yeah, Neptune. So why is Neptune so powerful? It is opposition to the moon. So that's, that's a pretty good opposition there. And it's even in orb of opposition to ascendant. And then it's square the MC, and then it makes a good strong trine to Jupiter.
Right.
And then, so it's semi-square Mercury, so it's semi-square Mars. So it has those two semi-squares, Mars and Mercury. So we know that the moon is very prominent and on the ascendant. The moon is the ruler of her personality, moon in Leo, the ruler of her personality. And there's the sun. She's got this air,
Trine.
this trine with the Aries. In Aries, you'd think that she's going to have that certain sun, that dignity of the sun, the leadership of the sun. It's exalted in the Aries, trine the ascendant. What's the moon on the ascendant? That looks really interesting. And then she's in the 10th house. She's got the two business planets. She's got two planets in the 5th house. So her dominant house is the 10th, and then it's the 5th. And with a prominent moon, she's going to be a talk show host. No, I just made that up. I'm kidding. And then that 9th house. So that's religion, philosophy, higher education, long journeys. So where are her strengths?
Well, that grand trine in fire.
Yeah, that grand trine in fire is like really very harmonious. The 9th, 5th, and ascendant. That ought to give her a pretty interesting personality with all kinds of shades of things. I mean, there's a little bit of Venus, there's a lot of the Sun and Aries, and there's Sagittarius influence and Mars and Pluto. So that's a real strength. So if you were in her most harmonious house is the 9th, and in Aries. So that's leadership in higher education, religion and philosophy, teaching.
Could be aesthetics too, and dramatic stuff.
With that very harmonious 9th house and the great aspects it makes in the grand trine, that you would want to, make opportunities available to her in that area. And you don't know how it's going to express. I mean, who knows?
In the higher education area?
Higher education or religion and philosophy or
Publishing?
Public speaking, traveling, lots of travel. You don't know how that's going to express, one of those areas, but they all make it be an important part of her life. But to the extent that they're made available to her, the better off she'd be.
You already talked about being in her own business now, and age 13. I think it's kind of amazing. But,
She's talking about being in business now?
yeah, she'd like to start her own photography business, or
Okay, well, that's interesting.
she's a good artist, and I think a good writer. She likes science. Even though I'm an engineer, she doesn't really care for mathematics. But,
Doesn't care for mathematics, huh?
no, even that,
She likes what? Science?
she does like science.
Uh-huh. Math. But, most of them have trouble with math because somewhere along the line they just didn't get enough help. I wanted to see, their Jupiter and Saturn. I mean, they're sort of in the mid-range there. But they're in the 10th house, both those business planets. And so that's a great thing, 10th and 6th house. So, and then with Saturn, all you got to worry about is your honor, credit, and reputation.
Yeah.
Because with Saturn in the 10th house, I can tell you from personal experience, you have to be really careful because you get caught at everything you do, and it impacts how people think of you.
Does that mean you have to be really good or just not get caught?
Well, well, it's hard not to get caught, so you got to be good. So you have to develop the scruples, but you always got to watch Saturn wherever it is. Let's look at the boys' chart.
Good, so
The
maybe
companionship, is these 4 houses right here. 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. So there's only 2 planets in those 4 houses.
Yeah.
4 planets in personal houses, and there's 4 planets in public houses.
I mean, that could mean that if you don't have a lot of planets in the companionship, you don't have to work at it as hard, I guess.
Wait a minute, say that again, Walt?
My interpretation is that there's a lack of planets in that companionship from the 4th to the 7th. Maybe that's an area in your life that you really don't have to work at. The ones that you do have a lot of, then my opinion is something that you have to work at, I guess.
It depends on how you look at it. Like, I don't have any planets in companionship houses. Any. All mine are all in the public and personal. Okay? So, you can imagine the heat I take for constantly worrying about business or myself instead of my family, right? So I have had to learn to make sure I concentrate on those areas, because if I neglect them, boom, you get. But having both Venus and Saturn, they're in the 7th. That may turn out well. So anyway, so that's those. Then life, wealth, association, and psychic, and those are all evenly balanced. So that doesn't tell us much. And it looks like you said, well, there's more fire than anything, and more mutable, adaptable fire. So that's Sagittarius, and then some Pisces, and a couple of planets in Virgo. They're more mutable. And then as far as the distribution of the houses, so Pluto on the ascendant, house 1 planet in the 2nd, 2 in the 3rd, 2 in the 7th, 2 in the 8th, 2 in the 9th. Looking for power in the houses, it's clearly the 8th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. It's kind of interesting. As far as harmony goes, it looks like look at something, the 8th house. So the 8th house, and what's the dominant, Mars is the most harmonious planet in the chart. And it's in a sign, it has some essential dignity, being in the sign Leo. And so does the Sun. They're not conjunct each other, but that's a harmonious house, the 8th house. So what does the 8th house rule?
Death and rebirth, transformation, other people's resources, money, legacy, contact with spirits and
The spirit world.
yeah, allies,
Interplane
ascended
friends.
master, interplane friends, right. Strikes me that this little guy packs a wallop. He's got a lot of clout, and he might cause other people to go through changes in order to get real with themselves. I'm sort of casting about in the way I choose my words. I don't feel real confident in that. But
Anybody got any comments there on this 8th house?
I like to look at it as resources and not just money. But
Well, yeah, but it's practically speaking, it's other people's money. I'm just trying to simplify it. What you can do, you just get real mundane here, and you can say, well, dealing with other people's money means, what kinds of people do that? Accountants, bankers, financial planners.
Or entrepreneurs, venture capitalists.
Venture capitalists.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, I trade, I invest myself, and I study charts, and I try to teach them, how to read a chart. So I don't compare to like managing somebody's, money and investment and
Right. Well, it's his most harmonious house, and that Mars is his most harmonious planet. They're essentially dignified, and they're trying the ascendant. Okay, so that sort of stands out as, now what do we say is dominant planet? The sun's his dominant planet, which is good for, especially if you're dealing with other people's money, because it gives you that, they have confidence in you. There's that air of confidence that goes with the sun.
He might become a solar engineer as well, and manage the resources of the sun in that way.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because it isn't just money. It is, it can be, resources that belong to the public.
Yeah.
It can be, the seventh house is the public. The first house is you, seventh house is everybody else, and how you deal with the public, the face that you put forth with the public is ruled by the seventh house. So, and then the public's resources are ruled by the eighth house. So those could be, they could relate to banking and finance, or it could be environmental resources.
Yeah.
Right? You just
Yeah,
sort of alluded to that. The eighth house, can anybody think of other things that the eighth house rules or relates to? Scorpio.
Death.
Yeah, death. You could be an undertaker. The
Detective.
place where they detective.
With Pluto on the rising sign,
And
he'd
in the
probably
12th
be a
house.
very good detective.
Yeah. It'll be interesting, Walt, just to see the things that he gets attracted to, and see if you can't start predicting a line. Drawing, connecting the dots, so to speak.
I'll keep you posted. I'm planning on being a Church of Light member for,
Good.
for a long time.
Well, you've got
Yeah,
two
they-
really interesting kids.
Comes from their mother. That's good.
Okay, so we've only got a few minutes here. Let's talk about what we're going to do next week. So I'm interested in topics that you're interested in. Anybody got any suggestions?
Well, I find chart comparison very interesting, but I find it difficult to do in this format.
Yeah.
I like to see the two charts presented in one wheel, or either synastry, or there's other methods.
Is there a
Yeah.
reason it said there'd be no class next week on the flyer?
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
That's
No
right.
class
There's no
next
class
week.
next week.
Good.
But there is the following week.
Okay.
That's another thing. So we could do some horary astrology. There's a lot of interesting things in horary astrology. And horary astrology is different. And we'll talk, we can talk a little bit about that. And for example, the lottery winners, lucky times, or financial prosperity, you can't predict lottery winners, because if a friend or family member ever asks you to do a horary chart on, are they going to win the lottery? You really don't have to do the chart, since
You
it's,
just say no.
you just say no, they're not. Sorry. But that does bring to mind other uses. One of the most interesting uses for horary astrology is to find things. Something's missing. You've lost your keys. Vicki and I use horary astrology all the time to find things. Vicki's particularly good at it. I mean, we've done it 100 times if we've done it once. And we almost always find what we're looking for using horary astrology. It's amazing. We'll do two charts, one for 7:55 p.m. Who was talking that brought up the Malaysian flight?
Fred Michael.
Oh, Fred Michael. Great.
Yeah, and I'm asking the question to Albuquerque, so I would think it'd be Albuquerque time.
So we'll do that. We'll also do one for the departure time. I think that would, we'll look at that. And, you know, the timing of the question is all important. So it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks from tonight, let's all get back together and we'll do some horary charts and talk about how horary astrology works. So I'm going to sign off. And everybody, thanks so much for coming. It's a good turnout.